Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for a design subcommittee meeting of the Boston Civic Design Commission. Today's date is Tuesday, April 22nd, and this is session A of the BCDC Design Subcommittee. The Planning Department continues hosting public meetings in a virtual setting for the health, safety, and accessibility of Boston residents. I'm Christina Rico, Executive Director of the BCDC and Senior Urban Designer of the City of Boston Planning Department. Before we proceed with the agenda, the open meeting law requires that I notify the public that this meeting is being recorded. Please turn off your camera and microphone if you do not wish to be recorded. For the record, Commissioners Eastley, Haseen, Manfredi, and Solano are present this evening. Tonight's agenda will include presentations for projects at 776 Summer Street, Phase 2 of South Boston. Tonight's meeting proceedings will begin with a brief presentation from the proponent focused on Building C, followed by comments from the commissioners and public testimony. Then the proponent will give a second presentation focused on Building B, followed by comments from the commissioners, and again, opportunity for public testimony, and then some summary of next steps. With that, I'm going to go ahead and invite the proponent team, who should be able to share their screen. Catherine, I'm going to promote you to co-host to be able to share your screen here. Give me 1 second. Okay. And before I kick it off to the proponent team, let me know if you're able to share your screen. Just have a brief summary here. So the proposed projects at 776 Summer Street, South Boston, seeking Article 80B or large project entitlement in accordance with an approved PDA master plan and Phase 2 development plan, contemplate the development of 4 buildings referred to as Blocks A, B, C, and E, and associated site improvements including portions of Edison Plaza, formerly the M Street Plaza, and public realm improvements on Summer Street, East First Street, and Thomas Edison Way. This will be the third presentation of the 80B application for these proposed projects to the Design Subcommittee, following an introduction at the February 4th, 2025 monthly meeting and subsequent meetings on February 18th and March 18th of this year. The Commission previously reviewed and approved a PDA master plan and a PDA development plan for Phase 2, which set out the regulatory context for the proposed projects. The most recent Design Subcommittee focused on projects at Block A and Block E. This Design Subcommittee meeting, as I mentioned previously, will focus on projects at Block B and Block C. It's my understanding that there are no commissioners present who intend to recuse themselves from deliberation. A reminder to the proponent team that the presentations will be each limited to 15 minutes, and I'll give you a 2-minute heads up when you're getting close to the end there. And with that, I invite the proponent team to begin presenting whenever ready.
Good evening, and thank you, Christina. I'm John Flaherty with HRP Group. We're excited to be back before you for our third subcommittee, as Christina mentioned. We will present the design changes and refinements we've made since we last met on both blocks. And then at the end of those presentations, we will review the relevant animations, which I know you asked about last meeting. So with that, we'll jump right in and we'll begin with the Block C team and Victor and Gensler.
Good afternoon. I'm Victor Paciotti, Design Director with Gensler. We can go to the next slide, Kate. We last shared Block C with you at 2 meetings, a full commission and subcommittee in February. So it's a pleasure to be with you again this afternoon to share progress. This slide shows a high-level summary of the review comments you had shared, while also including some related comments from city staff, with whom we are meeting with regularly, weekly or bi-weekly, to track and review ongoing design progress. Perhaps the most consequential comment is the top bullet, where there was concern about building forms overhanging pedestrian realm below, creating a feeling of heaviness. Related, we were asked to explore architectural strategies to remediate that, as well as studying how the building meets grade. There was discussion at the building's southeast corner, specifically both building massing as well as exterior, and related to that, there was underdevelopment in terms of the turbine alley portion between Block C and the third turbine hall. Next slide, please. This is just an axonometric reminding us of the overall development site. Block C is the teal-colored commercial building at the left side of the image at the intersection of East First Street and Summer Street. Next slide, please. This slide is a duplicate of what was shared at the full commission meeting on February 4th. The two renderings at the top illustrate the design of the building at that time. In the upper left image, you can see a massing that was based on an idea of overlapping folding forms with a lighter upper mass that was floating over a darker base. The image on the upper right, which we'll duplicate tonight, shows the view into the development along the new Thomas Edison Way with the portal through the historic turbine alley beyond. Next slide, please. These are two vignettes that are stills from an animation shared at the February 18th subcommittee meeting. We're showing these images because they really did sponsor the discussion and concern about the heaviness of overlapping building forms over the pedestrian realm. Next slide, please. That comment and that concern took us really to a fundamental new look at the overall massing of the site. And those iterations transitioned us from the option you last saw on the right, a concept we called fold, to the current concept we're sharing this evening that we are now calling podium. The fundamental difference, as we take you through more detail, is the fold concept has the taller portion of the building overhanging and proud of the base. Among other changes, that relationship has now been inverted, with the 10-story portion of the building being recessed from prouder elements that are part of the base, or that we're referring to as two podiums. Please note the red property line and setback line. The new massing does continue to try and successfully give back area within the building ground floor footprint to expand and enhance the public realm. Next slide, please. The next two slides are 8 diagrams that show the rationale behind the new podium form. Diagram 1 is simply the allowable zoning envelope. Diagram 2 outlines or inscribes where the projecting forms will result. Diagram 3, which is one of the more significant moves, takes the full height of the building and recesses it or pushes it to the east 15 feet back from the setback. The northern facade is also recessed further from Thomas Edison Way to reveal the two projecting forms, the north and south podium. Next slide, please. Diagrams 5 and 6 show that the south podium is further recessed from the site setbacks. Diagram 7 shows the north podium taking on an angle to guide pedestrians coming from the north towards the building entrance. And finally, diagram 8 shows an ongoing commitment to transparency at the ground floor. Next slide, please. The master plan design guidelines stipulate that Block C should mediate scale from higher portions of the site towards the waterfront, transitioning downward towards the 4-story development along East First Street. The two projecting forms that we're calling two podiums transition from 10 stories to 7 stories to 4 stories to honor that design guideline. Next slide, please. The overall plan is similar in its location of program portions, with a west-facing lobby centered on Summer Street. Mostly transparent storefront retail begins on the north facade, wraps all along Summer, all along East First, and into Turbine Alley until terminating in tobacco house spaces. Access to loading and parking remains exactly aligned with Block B to the north. Again, note the dashed red line is the required setbacks line, and this is a good view of the additional space given over to the public realm. Next slide, please. This is a longitudinal section diagram showing the overall stack of the building. There's a 21-foot floor to floor at the ground floor containing retail, lobby, and back of house, and nominally 9 stories of 15-foot floor to floor. And this section illustrates the 7-story mass at the north, up to the 10-story high, and then dropping back down to a 4-story mass, honoring the 50-foot step back that's part of the zoning envelope. Next slide, please. Layering on information that'll inform the facades. The facades really emerged from an analysis of some of the legacy industrial structures throughout the South Boston neighborhood. Given that the Block C site is part of a transformation of an industrial site, our architectural analysis focused on buildings in the neighborhood that represent an architecture of utility, everything from historic Four Point to the design center to industrial buildings in the immediate environs of the site. Most influential in the facades that we've explored are the historic industrial lofts of the Fort Point neighborhood. While they are part of the industrial legacy, there's a particular craft and detail that has been that celebrates that architecture, including special details within the punched openings, such as accent mullions and frames, metallic frames within masonry frames. Next slide, please. The adjacent turbine halls are also examples of architecture that celebrates its industrial use, but at an entirely different, one might say, monumental scale compared to the precedents that we see in the historic Fort Point neighborhood. Next slide, please. So in the current design, it isn't our intent to literally replicate some of the details that informed the design, but we do seek to synthesize some of those influences through a modern lens into a building that reveals the DNA of the industrial architecture of the area. This illustration taken showing the northwest portion of the building shows a pattern of framed and punched openings. The 4-story and 7-story masses in a warmer gray, darker material contrasting with a lighter material used for the 10-story portion of the building. As we move around, you'll see a hierarchy of window openings from 3-story to 2-story to 1-story assigned to certain zones of the building. And then as we move closer, you'll note another level of detail revealed by the building. The podium portion in the foreground has a stepped or serrated pattern based on certain site orientations. The upper white mass has a much subtler 8-inch offset stepping in an opposing direction to the base to further animate that facade and bring back a dynamism that was perhaps part of the fold scheme. Next slide. We'll show you the same 2 pedestrian views that we had shared earlier in the fold. This is at the intersection of Thomas Edison Way and Summer Street, looking south. This is a good vantage point showing the stepped facade of the 7-story podium and the way that it angles back to reveal the entry canopy to the main entrance beyond. The next slide shows the pedestrian sidewalk view looking north. This is a good illustration of how the south podium is pulled further back from the setback, offering enhanced and expanded public realm for more indoor-outdoor relationships to the storefront retail. Next slide, please. And this is a view as if we had just crossed Summer Street walking east. Again, the south portion of the 4-story podium is pulled away from the setback to create a linear plaza along the south side of the building and open up and frame a view into the Turbine Hall 3 arcade beyond. Next slide, please. And this is an overall view looking at the southwest portion of the building where we see it step from the lower 4-story podium up to the 7 and then up to the 10-story height of the building. This is a good vantage point for the different hierarchy of punched openings that you see. In the foreground, the 3-story tall punched openings are meant to speak to the tall openings of the south face of the turbine hall, seen along East First Street. And then there's a hierarchy of 2-story openings, single-story, and 2-story openings celebrating the top of the building and where it meets the sky. Next slide, please. The material palette is studying alternatives such as brick masonry, precast concrete, or gypsum fiber reinforced concrete, metal panel accents, and metal fins. Next slide. Changing gears to the detail of Turbine Alley and the south east corner. What we heard both from full commission and specifically at the February 18th subcommittee meeting is a request for further information on Turbine Alley. You can see the plan shared on the left-hand side really didn't show information in Turbine Alley. And the inset at the lower left was an illustration showing a recessed or sunken plaza that was questioned at the southeast corner. The plan on the left will show some responses to those questions, including a plaza that's at grade, and I will turn it over to Colin to walk through some of those characteristics.
Hey there, I'm Colin Curley, Senior Associate with Field Operations, Landscape Architects on the project. You can see here just a variety of kind of character precedents of what we're going for in Turbine Alley, really thinking of it as a pretty important north-south pedestrian connection from the neighborhood all the way down to the waterfront really being where the kind of activity that you're seeing in that kind of lower center image in terms of F&B spill out is concentrated. If you go to the next slide, this is really kind of giving a sense of the overall approach to the alley and a sense of the program. So kind of right and left on the page, gateways on either end of Turbine Alley at the waterfront and at East First Street. As you make your way from East First to the waterfront, the kind of center of the alley we're calling Workers Walk. The idea that both building facades and potentially other elements in paving could celebrate the kind of legacy of all of the folks who worked in the turbine halls. And particularly as you pass between Block C and Turbine Hall 2 and 3, the windows there will provide visual access into community space and the old Edison turbine. Turbine Place is kind of the intersection of the alley with Thomas Edison Way. That space kind of spilling underneath the continuation of the roof between the two turbine halls with visuals into the Edison turbine. And then as you continue further north, more of Workers Walk, transitioning into what we're calling the dining room, where you really get that F&B spill out both from Block D and the turbine hall, and then moving over to the waterfront at the northern end. Go to the next slide here.
Time
This
check,
is
Colin,
Yep.
for 2 minutes.
Oh, shoot. Okay. So quickly here, this is the plan of Turbine Alley. Significantly here, we have elevated the corner of the kind of page northeast corner here to 25. So we have a flush condition at the building. We no longer have that sunken recessed condition. Planter kind of subdividing circulation down into the alley, opportunity for civic and community space to spill out, but really thinking of this stretch of Turbine Alley as kind of the pedestrian connector to the more kind of active waterfront. Next slide. So just quickly here, giving a sense of the continuation of the material character from phase 1, some planters up against the turbine hall to the left where we have better access to light, cobble-like precast paving here to kind of give a more kind of historic feel to the paving. Next slide. And then looking back the other way with that planter kind of forming the transition, looking down with that kind of clear pedestrian path to the waterfront. And I think, Victor, if you want to just speak to
Yeah,
the character here.
I'll wrap up, Christina. Thank you for the bit of grace. I'll go by this slide. We're just showing a building overhang that helps separate the pedestrian realm from the 10 stories above with a light feature, and then end on the animation. We're showing you 3 animations tonight. The first will be here with Block C, and the 2 will come later. And Kate, let's roll the animation, please. So the walk starts north of Block D. As we walk along Block D, we're going to pass the Block D entrance to our left-hand side there, continuing to walk along Block D with the storefront and retail to our left, arriving at the intersection of Thomas Edison Way and Summer Street, where we'll look to the east, seeing the portal into the Turbine Hall beyond. Crossing Thomas Edison Way, the northwest mass of Block C provides a good illustration of the stepped facade, canting back towards the main entry into Block C, highlighted by a steel and glass canopy. Just south of the Block C entrance, the public realm widens again for a few bays, providing more street frontage. And as we approach East First Street, we'll look to the east and see the portal into Turbine Hall 3. That's a wrap for Block C. Christina, thank you for a couple seconds there extra. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem. Commissioners, we turn it over to you for discussion. Thanks, Victor.
I just wanted to say, Victor and Colin, that was a really clear presentation. Thank you for walking us through all this. I think I was at the last presentation of this building, so it's nice to see it emerge and evolve. David.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Thank you very much for the presentation. I think that I very much understood the process that you've gone through. Just a couple of quick comments, and I'll keep my comments focused on the architecture. While I very much appreciated the sort of sculptural dynamic quality of the first scheme, I also understand why you've come to the new podium design, and I found that strategy to be particularly compelling in the elevation diagram where you showed how it would step down to the neighborhood along First Street, and I thought that was a very thoughtful diagram that will, I think, go a long way in terms of the actual experience of that street and sort of holding the edge of that street, and so I think that all makes sense. I also appreciate the simplicity of the framing techniques that you're thinking about using here, and it's historic context within the historic context of waterfront architecture. I guess I just have a couple of questions and comments that I might ask you to think about. When you did the animation, and it mostly has to do with the storefronts at the level of the storefront itself. We've had this conversation many times about how important it is to keep the flexibility of the storefronts to accommodate multiple retailers, et cetera. But I do find it a bit relentless, just in its simplicity and purity as it moves around the building. On the piece of the building that is adjacent to Thomas Edison Way, where there's the serrations above, I think actually that's quite dynamic, Victor. I think that really helps the fact that the storefronts are so simple right below it. You get that scalloping effect. It's actually when the building wraps towards the Turbine Hall that you have this kind of long sheer facade with a long sheer storefront facade stepped below it. And I wonder if that's an opportunity to almost reverse the relationship. You had a very nice precedent. If you could pull up those precedent images, you had a very nice precedent image. Yes, the one on the upper left, which is maybe a bit extreme, but for retail. But could it be that the storefronts on that street under that facade have a dynamism to them that echoes the dynamism of the scalloping that you have elsewhere on the facade, so that all of that hits the ground conceptually in some place. And that feels like a place where it would be nice to have some rhythmic quality leading up to the edge of the turbine hall. So that was just a thought, for you to consider if those storefronts could somehow be richer. If you go to that view, if you could go to that view down um,
East First, I think you're referring to.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's thank you,
Yeah.
that view.
Yeah.
I mean, the framing is very clear up above, and it's just it's just a little severe, to my eye. The other place where there may be an opportunity, I think, to really echo the scalloping and some of the ideas that you had in the first scheme is in the canopy of the building itself, the canopy to the front door, which I think right now is a sort of simple extruded frame, which is very elegant. But I wonder if that couldn't be a little bit more of a statement, especially given the very sculptural quality of the building next door. Is there something there that could really announce entrance in a way that was that recalls some of the folding and stuff like that you have elsewhere in the scheme? A question. And then my last comment is that I'm all for contrasting with the brick of the turbine hall and making that making the new building read against that. And I'm not suggesting brick. However, it does feel cool. The building feels very cool relative to the warmth of the historic structures. And I wonder in my mind, as you think about the palette of the panels and stuff like that, is there an opportunity for it to, at some level, have some kind of tonal relationship, something warmer, I guess is what I'm asking. And there was one view that you had of the project, maybe it's an overall view, it could be that one, yeah, where the gray and whiteness of it really just sort of struck me. And I've always worried about white buildings in the Boston area because we're not in Florida and they don't look great in the rain. So I don't know if that's something for you to think about, but those are my thoughts. Anyway, but in general, I very much support the shift in direction and what you've been working on.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it. I have to say your comments about the base parallel, some things we've been hearing from city staff also. So those two things are working together. And I know staff also doesn't feel like we're quite there yet on the base. So those comments are coming from others at the city. And so point well taken. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David. I don't see other commissioner hands up right now, so I can add a few comments. And I wanted to there's a whole series of slides, 16, 17, 18, and 19. And since we were just talking about that edge, yeah, great. Maybe one of the ones that zooms out a little bit more. I'm really talking about the corner at Summer and East First. So I think this one's okay. My comment here is I think you were describing the different heights of these framed windows, and I actually think that they're quite successful. And I love the idea that you're announcing this is an important corner. I actually think it'll feel very much like a gateway to the project as you're coming along East First Street. But I am struggling with the scale. I think these are 3-story framed windows. And I wonder if you've looked at other scales, and it might be helpful maybe to go to one of those earlier images that show, yes, that's great. I wonder if you've looked at other scales instead of doing a triple height framed window here on the corner, whether there's another scale that might feel more in keeping with the pedestrian and the idea of having an entry here.
Commissioner Easley, I'm smiling because similar to what I said to Commissioner Hassan, also an ongoing conversation with staff. So we have studies in process that were a little underbaked for this session. We're getting, also staff had questioned the scale, the size, the height of those openings. So most definitely studies are already in process, and we'll be providing different iterations for that piece.
All right. Thanks, Victor. I will say that I do actually like that the material is the same, so that you kind of have the two corners, right? The corner onto Thomas Edison and then the corner onto East First Street. And I think that feels really good. It's just that scale there.
Thank you.
And then my next series of comments are about Turbine Alley. So Colin, these might be more for you. If we could go first to I think it's slide 25. So there are two things that I'm curious to hear more about. We're looking here at essentially the back of mechanical space in Building C. Is that right?
That's right.
Yes.
Okay. And so the idea here is that there would be a type of a graphic that would be telling the story, the history of the turbines.
Yeah, something along the lines of, telling stories of people or, yeah, some kind of history of the whole power plant there, yes.
Okay. So my comment here is that I wonder if this will feel like it's too long. It's a really long part of this building, and I actually love that this becomes the pedestrian passageway from East First Street. If I'm remembering right, you can't get between building B, I think it is, on the other side of Turbine Hall and wiggle your way through as a pedestrian. Correct. You can only get through here, and that's why I think it's such an important passageway. But that's a really, really long mechanical back of house facade here. And I'm wondering if there could be something more interesting that happens here. And then the second is this, really pronounced overhang that really closes out the sky in, again, what should be a really exciting pedestrian passageway. And so I'd love to hear whether you had looked at ways of maybe even making that overhang 1 story taller, or the pedestrian experience 1 story taller, so that space doesn't feel as pinched. And so that, I think, combined with maybe a more animated way through this alley would go a long way. And I think part of that is also thinking about what the evening experience is, through this particular place. So those were my 2 big comments about the project. I do really like that you've pulled back Building C from the intersection of Summer and East First. I think that plaza where you have some of the bistro tables and other things makes a lot of sense to me. Again, I'm not really understanding why there needs to be an overhang there. At first, I thought it was so you weren't blocking the view to the turbine hall loggia, but I think it's just more of a design detail, and maybe just that you need that additional space. But as you begin to look at materiality around that corner, maybe you'll be exploring that as well.
Linda, can I just chime in to piggyback on something you're saying? Because you're really right about that overhang. I wonder, I was just on a trip where there were a lot of arcades that were treated with digital media that were actually very impressive. I don't know if, given the neighborhood character around here, that's exactly right here, but it is interesting to think about the underside of that overhang, if we must have it, as part of the like if the wall idea wrapped up and under, and created something that enveloped you more rather than feeling like you were under something. That might be a way of thinking about what that display is, but it feels a little placeholdery to me. And I think if commissions if Catherine was here, she would be advocating for a more artistic, more specifically artistic approach to how that's handled. And so I guess I'd put that challenge back out there.
Yeah, to me, it just feels very flat. I mean, even, it's interesting to see the rendering, and you have this young woman facing the murals. I just don't know that it would feel like a comfortable or exciting place to sit or hang out, but I think it could be. I think it could be, and I think just trying to understand, well, how low does that overhang have to come? What are some other really interesting things we can do along that?
And I do want to quickly interject, commissioners, that all comments great. What you are seeing, most definitely a placeholder. I know that it is the proponent's intent to, in a later process, curate the narrative of the entire site as sort of a holistic or coordinated, curated experience. And so I think we're looking for the right placeholder in this, and this may not be it, but I did want to clarify that this proposal isn't meant to be literal and probably won't be getting to a literal one at this juncture until it gets looked at campus-wide.
Thank you. David Manfredi?
Well, first of all, I want to say I really appreciate the changes that you made in the massing on Summer Street and on First Street. I think they really do address the issues we brought up in the last subcommittee about overhangs and heaviness. And I think there's a simplification, a consistency that's really quite nice in the massing now, and quite a little bit calmer, and addressing the two street walls, and that sense of heaviness has gone away. Now, I want to go back to page 25 because Linda went right there, and I'm going to go right there. I got to tell you, I don't remember if you had this view at our last subcommittee looking, let me see, south on Turbine Alley. But I was really surprised when this slide went up, because I think this gets exactly at what we were addressing the last time you were at subcommittee. I find that mass really overwhelming over my head, and I think that's 30 feet from building to building. I think I saw that dimension on a plan.
That's right.
It feels like, so that means, and I think I saw the dimension that the cantilever is about 10 feet.
That's
But
right.
it looks like so much more, meaning, I don't know, half. And I understand that's the perspective, but I think the point is that's the perspective I will see as a pedestrian. And it really does cut down my view of the sky. It really I think it makes the alley far less inviting. And I had a similar thought to Linda's. I'm not sure it's the only thought, that at the very least, if you raised it a floor, if it was up another floor, I think that would help a great deal, because of just the relationship of a person to that ceiling above. And I don't know if that's I don't know if that's related to what you did on Summer Street, and you're recovering the dimension of the floor plate and the core to the outside wall. I don't know if that's trying to recover square footage on those upper floors. But one strategy would be to raise it. Another strategy would be to if it's a 10-foot cantilever, could it be a 5-foot cantilever? But I think it goes right at the heart. You've solved a lot of other really really, you come up with a lot of really other good solutions around the building, and I find this one um, really troubling. It really makes me not want to go down the alley.
David,
Um,
question. Do you think, because you raised two possibilities, I can't help but ask myself if part of it is because it's cantilevered. If it was arcaded, would you feel differently about it?
I thought about that, David, because on the far end you actually have a split in grade, but I don't think I would. um,
Okay, I'm just
I
curious.
think that would, in some ways, that would even make them feel tighter, bringing that structure to the ground. Um, so no, I had a similar thought. I don't think so. I think it's just too much mass, too close to my head, and I'm just imagining if you took it up a floor, I would see so much more sky. I would feel so much more dimension as a place I did want to walk down.
Yeah, I think we're certainly hearing that Turbine Alley, in particular, this portion of the building mass is something we're going to have to go back and study. Commissioner Manfredi, you did infer something correctly. Where I guess the metaphor I could use is in terms of gross floor area, we're quite a bit below what's available for the site. And so it's a bit like squeezing a balloon, where we're, trying to mitigate how much more is taken away. And so I'm sitting here wondering whether the sweet spot is going to be now down to a foot here and there. Can this raise up, or can the cantilever be less? And can we push out 1 foot, 2 feet somewhere else, where if we are gently squeezing the air in that balloon, can we take some away from here, nudge something else out a foot or so? That's what my mind is going to help ease some of the negative qualities you all are perceiving in Turbine Alley. But you're right on. There is some pressure on square footage here that we're trying to find a way to weave in to making the pedestrian realm optimal. So that's right on.
My response would simply be this. Um, I, I don't think 1 or 2 feet is going to help me that much, but I do think if you could I think that you could minimize the loss, because I think this element goes all the way up to the top of the building, right?
No, it's only 3 stories tall.
Oh, it's
It
only
is
three stories.
yeah, it is imagine the podium on the south side that's 4 stories total. So the upper 3 stories of it wrap
Oh, I see. I see that. Yeah,
into the alley. And actually, there's
yeah.
one good thing that comes out of the overhang. It may be too far, but if you were in the alley, we also think it would be a challenging experience if 10 stories of building came all the way down to grade uninterrupted. And so having that 3-story projection, we do think helps visually break the pedestrian realm from seeing 10 stories up. And it may be that the dimension of that overhang is what's suspect here. So yeah, it's 3 stories. Thank you, Kate, for bringing that up. That same height you see along the south podium, that's the element that's wrapping
Yeah,
into
I
the
see.
alley.
Yeah, I
But
was just going to say, I think you could minimize your loss, not by doing one thing 3 times, but by doing not by doing 1 foot 3 times, but by lifting it a floor. But I thought I had more floors to deal with.
Well,
I just like to come back to the idea of that. Could you go back to that view, listening to David and Linda talk about this issue? I just wanted to throw out that, in my view, this is the architectural forms are pretty blunt, right? I mean, they're pretty strong forms. And I do go back, if that has to cantilever that much, I do ask myself if there's something about the frame language or some level of ornament, really, that could help support that cantilever, whether it's some expression of the structure or columns or brackets or something. I don't know what I'm talking about exactly, but that could be lit up at night, that could add a lacier more delicate quality to moving down this space that is in fact like a little bit more European in its scale and character. So I'm actually wondering if it's less an issue of I mean if it can't go anywhere, that gets to that issue of the treatment of the underside of it and how it relates to the walls. And I think it could be actually a very nice passage if it was a little bit if the building kind of loosened up a little bit in that space somehow. And so I'll leave it there.
Oh, Commissioner Eastley, I think you're muted.
Thank you. I was saying we're looking forward to having you work your magic on this. I see Laura's hand raised, and I know we need to take public comment and kind of wrap up at 6. So, Laura, do you want to go ahead?
Yes. Could we go to a site plan? I do, and while that's coming up, I do appreciate the change to the podium at the base. I think that it really has a very elegant base for the building. But the thing that I'm struggling with, and maybe you've kind of mentioned it several times, Victor, that while you have enlarged the public realm, I don't know that there's been a benefit shown to that other than there being space, horizontal space for that. And so if you go to some of the perspectives that show the building in the context of the landscape, the either one, we can look at all of them. But I think one of the issues that I have is that the building and the landscape are having a conversation, but I'm not sure it's a very interesting conversation. And I think that there's so little space for the landscape that I would like to see either the building do something to really kind of energize this corridor, or the landscaping to do something. And I'm not talking about, off the charts. We are, the place that we are is very urban. So I'm not looking for a garden as much as I am at kind of having a place when you're there. Right now you're kind of showing the tables kind of tied in, the pavement is kind of all the same. And I'm wondering if there isn't some kind of reflection, of the building that acknowledges that the landscape is there, that it's not just the landscape kind of pushed against it or parallel against it. I honestly think that, these are the hardest kinds of landscapes to do because there's so little room, right? And if you really care about urban spaces, then, you want to be generous with things like tree pits. And it sounds really prosaic, but it's critical to whatever landscape you can get in there to it actually having a chance to be healthy and grow. And so I would like to just see a few more layers on the landscape, or changes to the building that will help that, or both. And I think that out of everything that you've shown us, where there have been some really smart moves with the building and the way that it hits the ground, et cetera, I'm not sure that maybe your landscape architects have had time to respond to that in a way that is that I think is just more, more to it. And then so if we could look at the perspectives around, and there's kind of a sameness to them as well. And again, I don't need to have every single facade be a different landscape, but just as in a building where you have clues about where to enter and where the retail is, I think there need to be those same kind of clues telegraphed into the landscape. So you've got it here where like, this is the place to stop, but is that the right language for it? you know, how important are the corners? Do the corners, you know, have a place in the landscape of occupancy as opposed to intersection? And then if we could go to the alley, which I know has gotten a lot of conversation. The famous perspective. The thing that is so hard for me about this is that overhang on your building just splits the space right in half. And as a pedestrian, where are you supposed to walk? Underneath your building or out in the sunshine? I'm outside, but I'm not sure that this is like parting hair down the middle for me. And I think that overhang has really tied the hands of the landscape architect, because there's no mystery about this. The thing that can be so lovely about different alleys that you see in cities, you know, many different cities, is that there's no mystery here, and there could be some mystery here. So is it right that you see, you know, like a bowling alley all the way to the end? I don't know. I think that should be re-examined as to whether or not this should be both a place of passage and occupancy, and how I think it's up to the landscape to determine that and to really give the character of this. Architecture can only do so much in these kinds of spaces, but landscapes can be really powerful. You know, maybe it's with lighting, you know, there's lots of, I think, different opportunities. But again, just like I've talked about what are the layers of the landscape that are going in to make up this space, not just the layers of the building. So I'll leave it there. And Linda, I managed to come in to below our time, so.
Can I mess that up just by saying, Laura, I think your comment about the 50-50 thing, the minute you said it, I couldn't see anything else. And I really,
Yeah.
I guess one of this idea of the alley being mysterious is really interesting to me. And it makes me ask the question, if the building on the ground floor, like if the building has to go out that far, what if the ground floor actually was narrower? Like what if the building actually, the cantilever was less because the building under there pushed out a little bit more. And so there was something that you walked past, around, canted, or something to eliminate that 50-50 thing. So I think it's just like this, your idea, that observation, the sort of Damocles observation, and the 50-50 thing, but also your comment about mystery is really interesting to me.
Yeah, and it can be so subtle.
Right.
But you know, we're all drawn to those kinds of places. And you know, landscape has just a great ability to do that in the city. And
It's interesting too. I like the idea of the pinch point. I think that actually the cantilever is only a third of the space, but it does feel like
it
it's
splits
50%. It feels more overwhelming than 30%. All right, I'm gonna hand this over to you, Christina. It looks like we have one public comment, maybe others.
At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, dial *9 to activate the raise hand function and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Eileen Smith, are you able to unmute yourself?
Hi, yes, hi, Eileen Smith. I'm part of the IAG, lifelong resident. I live right around the corner from the project at 776 East Broadway. I'm very happy tonight. I have truly participated with these meetings, and I believe that the changes on Building C, which I came in late, but the changes from what I did hear that were presented were welcomed. That was a monster And I wish we could do a quick review of it again, but we are on the later side of the meeting. But I do appreciate the massing changes. And I have to comment in support of the board tonight because with the two Davids and Linda Easterly, yes, the turbine alley is it's really scary and it's really suffocating. And to make changes to that, that's actually what the neighborhood looks at as well. And I think that we should get a better piece of the pie with more thought. And I think a more, somebody said, a more artistic approach and a more delicate quality. So I was very happy to hear everyone's comments because they support basically what would be helpful for our neighborhood, not just the new residents and traffic that will be coming in. So I thought it was a very good presentation with changes, and I look forward to seeing more changes.
Thank you, Eileen. Any others who wish to provide public testimony? Commissioners, at this time, I see no additional hands raised, so I'm going to close the testimony for Building C. And perhaps instead of issuing recommendations for this project, we could simply move on to Building B and then conclude with summary.
Sounds great.
Just thank you all for your thoughtful comments. We took thorough notes and look forward to sharing our revisions with you. Thank you so much for the conversation.
Thanks, Victor. So it looks like Block B team is all queued up. I have a 15-minute timer, and I'll let you guys know when 2 minutes is approaching.
Great, thank you, Christina. Hi, I am Jason King with Arrow Street, and I'll be walking you through the refinements of the Block B residential building. You go to the next slide. We're starting with the full build site plan again to reorient everyone, and we'll just highlight that Block B occupies an important location on the site as it fronts East First Street facing the South Boston residential neighborhood, sits directly next to the historic Turbine Hall 3 building, and along with Block A forms a gateway from the neighborhood into the 776 Summer Street development. If we go to the next slide, we wanted to begin by resharing the concept massing diagrams that illustrate the key concepts for the project as a refresher before jumping into our recent updates. These diagrams have been shown before, so I'll move quickly and just note that we've refined the building's architecture, or as we've refined the building's architecture, we remain committed to the original design goals of using the massing to strengthen those connections between the neighborhood and the Summer Street development by angling the building for better sight lines, lifting the building up at key moments to enhance the views around Block B to the historic 1898 and Turbine Hall buildings, and to keeping the East First Street volume low in respect for the neighborhood's residential scale across the street. Moving to the next slide, through our conversations with the commissioners as well as the BPD planning staff, comments for Block B have primarily focused on the public realm. So beginning on the left of the slide, we heard a few different things, that we needed to provide more information regarding the space between Block B and the Turbine Hall 3 building along East First Street, to better define the architectural approach for how we navigate the grade difference between the finished floor elevations and sidewalk elevations along East First Street. That we need to study shifting the retail program further inward to complement the public realm activity of Block E Hotel, Block F, and the Edison Plaza. And finally, to better define the architectural character of the Block B and Turbine Hall 3 loading area and its impact on the public realm. We move to the next slide. We'll start with a plan, and on the left is the plan presented in February as part of the full commission meeting. As you can see, the retail space shown in red fronts East First Street, with the building amenity spaces shown in orange fronting the new open space at the Thomas Edison Way corner. On the right is our current plan, where we've swapped these two programs, placing the residential lobby and amenity spaces along East First Street and moving the commercial retail space to the corner. These moves have created positive impacts to the architecture and the public realm that we're going to illustrate through a series of ground plane vignettes and perspectives later in the presentation. As we move towards the bottom of this page, we've relocated the residential parking entrance along Thomas Edison Way further planned south to share a curb cut with the loading dock and reduce the total number of curb cuts from 2 down to 1, and restoring more landscape and sidewalk area to the public realm. We've also revised the architectural expression along this facade in a few different ways that relate to the site's history and enhance the story and serve as a positive contributor to the public realm. And then finally, on the right, we have designed the space between T3 and Block B as a colorful, welcoming space for users looking to access the Block B and Turbine Hall 3 bike rooms, and have revised the ground plane architecture along East First Street to respond to these grade changes. So we'll share perspectives of all these views as we move through the presentation. Next slide. On screen now is a before and after perspective view taken from the Medal of Honor Park. Moving the retail program to the Thomas Edison Way corner has allowed us to do a few different things. One, to revise the scale of the ground plane architecture to bring more of the upper building's architectural expression down to the ground plane along East First Street, which helps us create more opportunities for articulation of the facade. Two, it created areas for planters that we can use to help navigate the difference in grade change along this edge of the building. And three, helped us create a larger diversity of uses along East First Street, which include the residential lobby spaces, fitness space, and an exterior porch space that help activate that street edge. As we move to the next slide, we've enlarged this view a bit so you can see a little bit better. And the revised architecture at the ground plane begins to bring a rhythm of piers down to grade to better ground the building and break down the scale to relate to that pedestrian scale along the sidewalk. As you move into the Thomas Edison Way street, this rhythm is broken at the point of entry where we're using a larger base spacing and a change in materials to introduce and clearly articulate the residential building entrance along this street. Next slide, please. And here we've moved to the perspective from Edison Plaza with the design as it stood in February on the left and the current proposal on the right. Another result of the retail program swap is that we have opened up the facade with a more transparent and glassier expression to support the retail activity. And due to the relocation of the residential parking entry further towards the turbine halls, this glassier facade treatment now wraps further around to the north, replacing the more solid base that used to occupy the building that faced the 1898 building in the previous iteration. If we move to the next slide, we've got a larger view of that image, and again, highlighting that new retail base that will be able to complement the adjacent hotel activity across the street and serve as a vibrant terminus of the views from the Edison Plaza. And if we move to the next plan, thank you, Kate. And so as I've mentioned, we've created a series of vignettes to help articulate these improvements of the public realm experience. We'll walk around the building, and beginning on page right, we'll move counterclockwise, starting inside the Turbine Hall 3 arcade, walking up East First Street, then turning left on the Thomas Edison Way to see the building entry I mentioned earlier. Next, we'll move around the open corner retail space and finally walk down Thomas Edison Way towards the turbine halls towards the bottom of the page. So we can start that process with the next slide. Here, we're standing inside the T3 arcade, looking east towards Block B. The building mass at the ground plane is set back at this corner to visually align with the T3 arcade and continue that connection from Summer Street eastward past Block B and A and towards the Thomas J. Butler Park. This setback also creates an opportunity for an exterior porch space that can activate the East First Street sidewalk, which we'll see more of in just a minute. And if we move to the next slide, we've just exited that arcade and look to the left where we can see the bike room access area, which is adjacent to the two-way cycle track along East First Street. This space is meant to provide a safe and welcoming zone for the users entering the T3 and Block B bike rooms. And we're exploring multiple ways of achieving this safe and inviting feel, including through the use of colorful graphics applied to the ground, wall, and privacy screen, as well as lighting and movable planters to help soften the space. If we go to the next slide, we've turned back to East First Street and now have a closer look at that exterior porch space that results from our ground plane setback. And we envision this as an opportunity for the interior amenity space to extend out to the exterior on those nice weather days and further activate the street edge with additional life and vibrancy along East First Street. Moving to the next slide, further up East First Street along the edge of the ground floor, we designed the building facade in a way to help ground the building in keeping with the language of the building above, with small plane changes that help design to break down the scale and better relate to the pedestrian scale along the sidewalk edge. That rhythm of vertical piers and texture and adds that visual interest to the building edge, and leads to a glassy corner at the corner of East First Street and Thomas Edison Way to provide better visual transparency and a lightness to the building at that public realm moment. Moving to the next slide, we've turned the corner around onto Thomas Edison Way, and you can see where the rhythm of the piers developed in that slide previously is then broken at the building entry to create a larger bay to help clearly designate the point of entry. And as we move to the next slide, you can see a slightly different view of that entry point. And we're envisioning a change in material at this particular moment to one of a rich color and varying textures that again help accentuate and clearly identify the residential entry point. Moving to the next slide, we've now turned the corner at the Thomas Edison Way intersection to see the potential of how that commercial and restaurant or retail space can really activate this corner of the project with life, color, and vibrancy that can also make it a destination for both the South Boston residents, the Block A and B residents, Block E hotel patrons, office users, and everyone else that's visiting the 776 Summer Street development. Next slide, please. Continuing down Thomas Edison Way, that commercial space is to your left now, and the turbine halls are straight ahead. The ground plane remains open, inviting and glassy as it turns the corner and extends down the north facade. This becomes a little bit more apparent as we move to the next slide, where on the left, once again, is the plan as it stood during the first full BCDC commission, where the residential parking entry had its own curb cut along Thomas Edison Way. We had not fully developed the architectural expression of this area at that point in time, but on the top left is where things stood, and we're really using it to show the impact of how that residential parking entrance, what that impact is to the base of the building into the public realm as a whole. The vehicular entry point really bifurcates the base of the building, which was leading towards a more solid and visually impermeable facade. So to the top right is our current design, where that glassier retail commercial space is able to extend further along the north facade, improving the overall public realm experience along this edge. And the residential parking entrance, again, has been relocated to share that same curb cut with the loading zone, reducing the overall number of curb cuts from 2 to 1, and allowing the building to really ground itself at this corner in a much nicer way. If we move to the next slide, we've also begun to refine the architecture for this area above the parking entry and loading space by working to develop a design that can build upon Block B's close adjacency to the turbine hall and enhance how the story of the site's history and historical significance is told. From an architectural expression, we've developed a series of angled panels in keeping with the facade language of the building above. And the idea is that as users move around this space from Block E towards the turbine halls, the visual perception of this facade changes to reveal different artistic interpretations of that important historical story. Standing here in front of the 1898 building, users will see more of the solid panels that could display a visually rich graphic, such as this historical drawing showing the cross-section of the Turbine Hall 3 boiler house. And as you move to the next slide and closer to the turbine halls, more of the perforated metal that's being used to screen the mechanical louvers and back of house spaces behind is revealed, with a screened graphic or perforated print that reveals an image tied to the site's history of power generation. This images show an example of the power meters that are found in the original switch house building that were measuring the electrical output of the turbines. And as you move to the next slide, we've moved into turbine place, where users will see this same imagery in context with the T8 turbine that's being preserved and displayed inside the T2 Civic space, just visible to the right of this image. So we're really excited about the ability for the Block B architecture to tie in with the site's history and to both enhance and continue the educational component that's taking place inside the T2 Civic space. And finally here, from a materiality perspective, we're continuing to use warmer building materials that include moments of interesting detail and texture to articulate the facade in moments of entry and other key elements for the project. At this point, I think we're going to switch over to the animations. And I believe the first one, first animation begins with Block C at that corner of East First Street and Summer Street and walks east down East First Street through the Turbine Hall Public Arcade and on to Block B. So on the left, you'll see Block C in the public plaza space facing East First Street that Victor just spoke about. As we move past the building and look left, we see the Turbine Alley public space that connects the neighborhood to the waterfront, which also includes entries into the T3 Civic space. From there, we walk through the T3 public arcade with entrances into the civic space, office lobby, and retail space. Now we've exited and are walking along Block B. You see that exterior porch space to your left and the facade articulation along the new residential lobby spaces to your left, and sort of kind of complete the animation as we hit the corner of Thomas Edison Way and East First Street. And I think the second animation is going to lead us through Turbine Place. Thank you. So the T2 Civic space is just to your right. Through a glass curtain wall, you'd see the T8 turbine machine that's being preserved. And as we exit, you see the perforated metal facade where that historic image would be displayed and kind of transition into two different images. Continuing along the north elevation of the building, we're now walking through that area where the second curb cut was eliminated, restoring more sidewalk and landscaping to the public realm. As we get to this corner, we'll start to look left and see the Edison Plaza space between blocks E and F that connect the public realm to the waterfront open space. And now we're turning back towards Block B and continuing down Thomas Edison Way. As you're continuing down, the Block B entry just appeared to the right, and then we sort of end at the East First Street edge of the sidewalk looking towards the neighborhood. And I think that concludes our presentation for Block B.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate the presentation. Can you give us maybe a site plan or something just to start us off with our comments?
And could you blow that up a little bit? Thank you.
David, you want to kick us off?
Oh, no, I thought you were going to go, Linda.
Oh, no, go ahead. I see your hand up.
Okay. So I'm wondering about relationship at the ground floor of this building to Turbine Hall. By the way, I think there's a lot of really nice improvements, especially around the base of the building on East First and on the, let me see, east side of the building, and bringing the lobby out to East First Street, bringing the retail into what I hope will be a very active Four Corners. I'm wondering about the another very nice thing is eliminating that curb cut. I wanted to mention that as well. That's really nice on Thomas Edison. But I'm wondering about the relationship of the building on the ground floor to Turbine Hall. And I'm not sure. And when you walk down East First, I was hoping you were going to turn left at the bike axis. And when you walk down Thomas Edison going, let me see, west, I was hoping you were going to turn down into the parking entrance access, because I don't really understand the seam between the two. And I think what I'm seeing in plan now is I see the edge of Turbine Hall where it says Turbine Hall Civic Space, where the purple is. That's the perimeter of Turbine Hall. The kind of slate blue gray space is loading docks and all your back of house stuff.
Correct.
And then there's that no public access space, which is the backside of the loading docks, and I'm sure supports the building. But was it always true that, meaning in first time we saw this, that there was no pedestrian way through between the two buildings?
We can probably bring up that plan before, but correct. We tried to locate the Block B transformer alcove and back of house spaces immediately across from the Turbine Hall 3 spaces so that we can maintain active uses along the perimeter on Thomas Edison Way and East First Street. I think we tried to make it more clear in this plan on the right that their intent was that there would not be public access through this zone. We also don't want to dilute the importance of Turbine Alley. So we really want people kind of walking through Turbine Turbine Alley from the neighborhood down to the waterfront because we knew there would need to be loading activities and back of house spaces and support spaces along this kind of spine between T3 and Block B. So the intent was to not have pedestrian access all the way through on this side and really focus that pedestrian connection on Turbine Alley.
And so are the loading docks that are on Thomas Edison, are they open to the sky and visible from the street in both the loading dock that says loading, and then the dock just east of it where there are two trucks or a truck and a dumpster are parked and a ramp?
Yeah, so within if we start at T3, within that gray space that says loading, so just the cursor just to the right, that's interior to the building. Just to the left of that, where it says Block B T3 shared loading, that is loading that's open to the sky. And then where you're seeing those two trucks just north and to the right of that, that is also open to the sky with a canopy structure over the actual loading dock. The two buildings are planned right now to share loading access. So T3 users would come out a door from that gray loading space onto that dock and use that ramp if necessary, or the two docks could be used by both buildings. It's intended to sort of be a shared loading zone to try to consolidate those and not have two different zones of loading happening along this edge.
I guess I'm wondering, thank you for the explanation. I'm just wondering what I should see and what I shouldn't see. And if there's some kind of, I'm not suggesting that the white has to be enclosed building. I'm suggesting that I don't, as a pedestrian, I don't find myself wandering into your loading dock, that there's some kind of ornamental gate or something that keeps me out, but also just kind of blurs what I can see on that loading dock, because you're serving all kinds of uses. And I'm wondering about whether that's something you really want to see. That whole I appreciate the fact that you've turned the parking entry, and I think that whole edge is greatly improved. But between where it says Turbine Hall Civic Space and where it says parking entry, I guess I'd love to see when you walk down the street. I wanted you to turn and look into that, so I really understood it. But I think you've got a lot of exposed stuff there that I'm not saying, like I said, it doesn't need to be building it with a roof over it, but I think it needs an edge that closes it off when the loading dock's closed, when the shared loading, however you've determined to do that. I think that is part of public realm and should be a little better defined. I'm a little bit torn about, by the way, I think the definition of the ground floor and the exterior is so much stronger in that one view you showed of before and after from I think that's the southeast corner. That view was greatly improved, but I'm out on First Street looking north.
I think it's from the Medal of Honor Park, so a little bit further up in the presentation.
I also wonder about, I think you had the one
one.
before this was kind of a side by side. Didn't you have, in any event, the definition of base here is so much stronger and goes all the way down First Street. I think that's much better. And I think I should have been paying attention to the numbers. Go into that little alcove that leads you to the bikes. Because I think that it's nice that there's a break between the buildings, that light comes down. I know there's a little bit of structure beyond it. I wonder if you just couldn't do a little bit more with this space, the trees in the and the planters feel like you want to move them at some time. I don't know if you need to, but
We do that. You're right. They do feel that way. So this is actually also where Eversource will need to
get access.
potentially get access at some point, get access to the transformer alcove and rooms beyond. So I think we agree with you in terms of they look like they could be moved, and we would like to see more. But at the moment, we're trying to design for that potential need of having to get these out of the way.
I wonder if I'm not sure I know your plan well enough, but that's fitness to my right. And if that
Yes.
could if you could even bring fenestration back further. Oh, I see you have a corridor there, but I'm just trying to animate that space a little bit more.
Yeah.
Because you don't want it to be, I'm glad that you've indented and not connected, brought the gray out further to First. I just wish it would feel more usable.
I think we could do a better job with that core location and to get to your point, more fenestration and activity along this edge. So yes, point well taken. I think we can improve on that.
I wish I'd love to say that where fitness is, I'd like to see retail, but I know you've really got a one-sided street here in many ways. So I think putting the retail into Thomas Edison, and if you really can make those four corners active, that could be a really nice space. So those are my comments. I do think there's a lot of really good progress and attention to where enclosed building meets public realm. There's some edges that could get better.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. David Hassan.
Thanks, Linda. Well, I just want to say that I think you've made huge strides. I'm particularly excited about the retail residential lobby, the reprogramming of the ground floor, Jason. I think it makes so much more sense to me in terms of animating that central space in a lively way and putting residents and in a more passive way, in a sense, on this quieter towards the neighborhood. I think that makes tremendous sense. And I also really very much like the articulation of the building, and as David mentioned, the base and the warm tones. I actually think that there's a lot about this building that I hope migrates into other parts of the site, because it feels scaled, a very human scale to it. As I think about the project we were just talking about, I almost wish that there is a residential character that you've attached to a residential building here as it hits the ground. But I feel like some of the corporate character that's hitting the ground on some of the buildings that are more lab oriented on this site could maybe be softened quite a bit and could pick up on some of the themes that you are picking up on in this building. A few minor comments. I see that you've reorganized the balconies. And I think it's a fine line between creating something that's playful and something that looks chaotic. So you may want to just, as you develop that, just be thinking about that. Like, are there places where the balconies are anchored and then they sort of dissolve, in different ways? But like I was noticing in some of these views that it might be fighting the legibility of some of the forms a little bit. So I just, that's completely up to you. The other thing is that in the view down East First Street, where you have that overhang, yes, there we go. I think that's a really, really nice space. And I feel like some of the language that you were looking at in terms of the perforated double reading spaces that are concealing mechanical spaces, on the other side of the building adjacent to Turbine Hall. Is there an opportunity here for this recess to get a little richer, a little bit more ornamented? The underside of the canopy looks a little slick. This is, to me, I'm really thinking about trying to create trying to create this residential character that feels so that everything doesn't feel like a form, but there are actually some parts of this project where there's layers of detail and layers of information. And that's why I was so intrigued by this double reading thing that you're doing on the turbine hall. Could that spirit somehow wrap around the base of this building and create shade and shadow and lighting and layering that could be really nice, not only here, but elsewhere on the site? But in general, I think that it's looking really strong, and that's it.
Great. Thank you. I think we can definitely take a look at this. There's something unique happening with this particular spot, so adding an additional layer of kind of texture would be, or something here would actually be really good for the whole streetscape. So yeah, I think we can definitely take a look at that.
Yeah, it feels a little bit more like, I mean, I almost feel like the restaurateur might do it, but it feels like something like a little bit more of a porch. It's almost like a front porch on the street, and there's something really humane about that. And I hope that when the other project thinks about its storefront on this street, it may not be quite the same thing. I mean, it shouldn't be quite the same thing, but again, how does it have a rich neighborhood character up to 10 feet? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there we go. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. Laura?
Could we go to a plan? First of all, the changes, the tour around the building was really so helpful. And this is the first time that I'm seeing this project in any form or any of the buildings. And so I appreciate the changes that were made. But I would love a tour around the building relative to topography. It's complicated. You're meeting other grades on, on the Edison building. And I want to make sure that I understand that. Would you be able to do that, Jason, or maybe Colin could do it?
I can take it if you want, Jason.
Go for it, Colin.
Sure. So a lot of the grade change on the site is happening on East First Street. Those grades fall away pretty quickly. When you're by number 5, you're around elevation 30. And then by the time you're at the entrance to Turbine Alley, you're down at 25. So Thomas Edison Way, because we're tying into East First Street, that whole frontage is around 30. And then similarly, Thomas Edison Way to the north has to dive down. We're pinched by kind of the intersection, as well as meeting the 22.5 elevation of the turbine halls. So that side is coming down at around 5%. So conditions, grade where it's flush is pretty much along Thomas Edison Way. It's favoring that frontage. That kind of retail spill out, you can access from the building. There's also a small opening to get to it from the street. But that's why you're seeing, Jason's elevated, fitness spill out area there, because that down by number 2, I think we're down at 27 and change at the bike access there. And then you can see elevation 23 over at the parking entry on the other side of the site. So generally speaking, level along Thomas Edison Way, pitching at different slopes on East First and Thomas Edison Way.
Yeah, it's a classic kind of coming together of a lot of grades. What is this piece here? Is that into some kind of service, or I'm curious as to how that's connected and why it's connected that way.
Sorry, I just want to make sure I understand. You're pointing to the, that right here?
Yeah.
That along where that blue line is a continuation of that retail facade, and
I see.
Coming along the north edge of the building. Previously, that was much shorter and there was more solid mass because we also were putting the parking entrance through that spot. So the idea here is that we can wrap that glassier, more active facade around the corner. Yeah, exactly. So that users outside of 1898 and the hotel are coming out and looking at, what's on the right as opposed to what's on the top left.
So is that occupiable, or is it just simply
it's occupiable.
Space? It is. Okay.
Yes.
So dinky. right? It's
Could be a really nice private dining or some other
Mhm.
space that we're hopeful that could work. I mean, I think we're going to continue to develop the building, continue to develop how the egress kind of comes out the building. And if we can kind of make that space a little deeper and better, that's definitely a goal of ours as we kind of progress into the project.
Yeah, and I noticed, the way that you show grade around the terrace outside of the retail is pretty different. In your walk around the building, it's different. In one of the perspectives, it's different. And so I'm just going to take that as it's under development. But I think that the grade should really be in that area. And if you could zoom in a little bit on that area, because as Colin mentioned, like you've got all these kind of planes coming together, and it's really hard in an urban condition. And there's a couple of things. One is, should you think about whether or not there's a layer of walls here to help both kind of calm the grade on the lower level, but also maybe provide some opportunities on the upper level to think about this terrace as maybe a different shape and not so beholden to being parallel with the roads. I think that it might feel a little more generous and maybe more relaxed, since the building has a lot of comes down and meets the ground. So that's just one thing I think that might be studied. And then could we go to this? I think it's the perspective, maybe.
I'll just say quickly on that corner, the idea is that the planter is what's taking up grade. So we're
Yes,
kind of
I understand
allowing it
that.
to sort of,
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I just wonder if there's something that should kind of hold the edge, and maybe it's a place for people to sit. I'm not really talking about like this,
Yeah,
Sure.
Sure.
And even you may not even need the second wall that I drew, but it's
Yeah,
something to think about.
sure.
Okay, let's look at the perspective that goes into the alley. So if I'm understanding this, these planters, this is an access for, who did you say needs to get in there?
Eversource would
Eversource,
need to
okay.
get access because the transformer rooms for both buildings are behind the screen wall that's at the end of this space.
Yeah, so I looked at the plan and there's doors along this side, but you can't help but wonder, like, is there instead just an opportunity to do some planting along this edge so that you don't have to have those? I mean, moving these is like a crane almost, because they're so heavy. And then architecturally, why not pay this a little more attention so that this space actually has a background to it, and it doesn't feel like there's one architectural expression, another one, and then a third one that is clearly the poor cousin. And so I wonder if you thought more about what this facade to that space does, that it actually would feel like a much more sophisticated space and not a leftover space. And is there seating in there? And my suggestion that maybe the plants come to the edge is that you never have to move anything, right? Take the planters out, let Eversource have free access anytime it wants. If you don't have to think about it. So some things to study, I think.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, frankly, both of the architects have, one of the best landscape architects in the country, if not the world. And so I'm sure that they can help you to think through that. I think that's it. Otherwise, I think there's been some really great and terrific changes, and all of it feels really respectful to me of the landscape. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Laura. almost all of my comments have already been said, which is great. I have just a couple to maybe elevate. So on slide 7, I really wanted to compliment the team on this, the kind of narrower piers and the decision to really lighten up that ground floor is huge. And like we were talking about on building C, you know, this also will be the gateway into the site along Thomas Edison. And then you've got that long view to the water from here, if we just kind of even turn the perspective a little. And I think it's really going to be very successful. So I appreciate you listening to our comments about that and making that change. I wanted to talk a little bit about porches before I get to the loading area. The porches, in my mind, for this building are a really unique element. I love the surprise factor with them. And I'd really encourage you to be thinking about the language of those porches in maybe a little bit more of a playful way. To me right now, they feel very practical.
Mm-hmm.
But if you imagine what's happening coming out of the fitness area, you know, juice bar or whatever, that could be a really great social, playful space. And you don't really get that reading the way that it's detailed now. And then on the flip side, I think on the north side, on Thomas Edison, the idea that the retail continues and the grade drops, and then you've got that porch condition. Right. Yeah, there was the other diagram that might have been a little easier. Right. I think that also could be a really wonderful outdoor social space, even though it's more intimate in scale. And so I would think about that a little bit more. Can those porches actually even become a little bit wider? And as you're thinking about the animation of this plaza area and, you know, kind of food and beverage coming out onto that plaza area, you know, could you continue it onto those porches as well? So I like the idea of the surprise element, and I would love to see it become a little bit more than it is. The last comment, and David Manfredi talked a lot about this, is really about that loading area. And the changes you've made with this building have been terrific. And I feel like this is the area that really hasn't been studied as much as it should be, primarily because of the views into it from, you know, across Thomas Edison, and for anyone that's essentially walking into the site. And so are there opportunities here for screening with walls or plantings? And are there opportunities to close off these areas that you really don't want anyone going into? So I would love to see a few ideas about that when we kind of have all of these groups come back for the wrap up.
Okay. Yeah, we can definitely look at that. I think our focus has really been on that facade expression along this edge and making sure that that part of the building, which sort of back of house in nature, can have an opportunity to kind of interact with the public realm, really more that zone that faces the loading dock gate. So, but yes, I think we will take another look at what it means at the actual ground plane in front of those loading dock spaces.
Yeah, that would be great. And there's a good view of the porches there that I was talking about earlier. Yeah.
Jason, I'm thinking like David mentioned, you know, the possibility of gates or something in that area. Linda was talking about these porches and this expression. Laura mentioned the gates literally to the vaults around the corner. And I was talking about the retail porch, right? And I wonder if there's just an opportunity for you and your landscape architects to put your heads together around a language of metalwork, gates, detail that is essentially integrating the landscape and the architecture, bridging between the architecture and the landscape, and wrapping the entire building in a way that's really rich. Because it feels like we're all kind of zeroing in on all the potential that exists in those places. So I thought, Linda, I just wanted to put that in there because I was sort of hearing like little pieces that could all theoretically come together as something more thematic around the base of the building, which could be really nice.
Yeah, I really love that, David, because I think it also creates a new level of animation with that, and helps that ground plane because it's sometimes raised, sometimes at street level. It kind of helps it read all the way around the building. So
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I think there's a lot of great opportunities there. There's even opportunities to that point, as you're saying. It makes me think we can tie into some nice landscape areas that are happening in front of the building or near the building entrance along Thomas Edison Way that could also connect those dots all the way from the loading to the east first porch space. So yes, those are great comments that we can take a look at.
great. I don't see any other commissioner hands. Christina, do we have any public comment? And then we can come back and talk about next steps for both buildings and for the project.
At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, dial *9 to activate the raise hand function and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Eileen Smith, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. I just have a couple of quick questions that I didn't understand on the curb cuts from the 2 to 1. Could Jason King explain where that second one was removed from? Is it?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, we have, I forget the slide number. Thanks, Kate. So on the bottom left is the plan back in February. And so we've got 2 kind of large arrows pointing at to where on the top there was a parking entrance off of the road into the building. So that would have been the first curb cut. And then the one below, just below that, which is a curb cut into the shared loading space. So on the bottom right is the new plan where that first one was eliminated and returned to landscaping and sidewalk space. And now you would enter using the same curb cut. Yes, exactly. A place to enter the building parking entrance as well as the loading. So it's all kind of shared in that one space.
Who shares that curb cut?
Blocks B and the turbine hall for their loading functions and for their residential parking, or Block B's residential parking entrance.
And do they have access to the Summer Street entrance as well?
These particular loading docks are dedicated to turbine hall 3 and Block B. So you would drive up Thomas Edison Way and connect into them right at that point of where that pink arrow is.
Okay. Thank you. And I have another question for you. Are those porches or balconies, and are you going to provide a certain amount of them? And why are they so just thrown on the building? So there's 3 questions in one.
So the porches, we are referring to the spaces that are at ground level, where those uses on the inside of the building, you can open up doors and kind of walk out and have an indoor-outdoor experience. And again, kind of activate the street life that's happening around those. The balconies are currently located with intent at units with better views towards either the water or to, above the residential buildings on East First Street and out to the park and kind of the greater South Boston neighborhood. We definitely heard, the commissioner's comments about taking another look at those balconies and how they interact with the building and making sure they don't have a haphazard look to them. So I think that's something the design team will continue to kind of refine as we move forward.
Okay, my last question for you, I'm sorry. Predominantly, it looked like the building materials are going to be brick. Is that correct?
We're exploring a bunch of materials, to be honest with you, but yes, we're looking at masonry, including some metals, but all in kind of those warmer, kind kind of color tones where we can find ways to add detail and texture either through coursework or specific materials that have a little bit more of a vertical ribbed texture to them.
Yes, definitely warmer to the neighborhood is appreciated. Thank you. Thank you for the questions.
Thank you.
And
Thank you, Eileen. Are there anybody else here who would like to provide testimony? All right, commissioners, at this time, I see no additional hands raised, so we're going to close the public testimony period.
Thank you, Christina. So commissioners, we should just talk about next steps. The original idea was that we would have one more subcommittee now that we've seen these blocks kind of in individual chunks. The idea was to have a subcommittee where each of the block proponents would be invited back to show updates and changes. How do you all feel about that plan? Kind of a collective update and a collective review.
I'm sorry, Linda, you're saying see the pair of buildings that we saw again at another subcommittee or separated?
Yeah, let me try that again. So the original plan was that we would have one last subcommittee where we would invite all the proponents for all the blocks.
Oh, got it. Okay.
To come back and share any of the updates and changes that we had requested at earlier subcommittees. So we would have one kind of comprehensive subcommittee where we would see all of those updates and be able to see them kind of in the context of each other.
I'm wondering if this could be, I support that, but I'm wondering if it's 4 buildings, correct? So I'm wondering if, there were, for example, tonight, I feel like there was a lot of discussion around the base of both buildings. There were some other comments, but it was mostly around the base of those buildings. And I don't know, maybe Christina can speak to the subcommittee meetings about the other 2 buildings. But it feels to me like it might be a good idea to come back, have each proponent spend not more than 10 minutes or 15 minutes max, just sort of talking about the building, focusing on the evolution and the comments, and have them just run back to back, and then giving us maybe an hour to dialogue on the whole assemblage. So that we don't get bogged down, I'm thinking, like, in each building again.
Yeah, more of a pechakucha.
Yeah.
Kind of a style with lots of time kind of left for talking about the interstitial space, the spaces that are being framed and formed by the buildings as a district.
The 4 teams at one point, I can't remember at which point in this, did a combined walk around all 4 buildings. It wasn't, you didn't see one building and then the next building and the next building. You walk down Summer Street, turned left onto First Street, turned left onto Thomas Edison, came around the corner. That was really helpful. And we spent a lot of time tonight talking about the seams between buildings. It would be really nice to see it all together and understand from a pedestrian point of view, and look down each of those out into that space where the transformers are, back into the loading docks, across the street at the hotel building. That would be very helpful.
Yeah, I like that, David.
I think that that makes a lot of sense. Happy to facilitate that. I think the one outlier, and Commissioner Manfredi was present at the last subcommittee meeting. I think that was one that maybe Seth or Diana facilitated. I think there was a lot of discussion remaining on Block E. that maybe was a different scale than the kind of conversation, E being the tower, the hotel tower. That was different than I think A, B, and C, which are the 2 residential buildings, and then the lab building at the corner that we reviewed tonight, where really the discussion seems plainly focused on this ground floor relationship to the public realm. So I think what I'm hearing from the commission is that all 4 proponents should return together for a kind of penultimate subcommittee discussion. And then I think, Linda, we're happy to follow up with you and the proponent team to discuss how we format the structure of that meeting to make sure we're hitting on all of the outstanding.
Well, Christina, I guess my question, again, not having been a part of the Scheme E discussion, I worry that if that was lagging relative to the other 3 sites that we could get tripped up by that. Does it make sense for Building E to have another subcommittee meeting on its own before we review the whole project, so that it gets caught up in a sense with the process? It's just a question.
Yeah, I think I'm wondering actually from a timeline perspective, just because we're scheduling so far out at this point, if we might just simply structure another double session, like the one where we had tonight, where we make sure we give plenty of time and space around E, and then another session focused specifically on this public realm and ground plane of all 4 buildings together.
That makes sense.
I really like the idea of a double session. I feel like we just can't get through it all in 1 hour.
Yes, understood. I think to the proponent team and the project managers who I see here, we'll work together to make sure that the scheduling for that works out, and that we can get to all of this in a timely manner.
That sounds great.
Well, with 2 minutes to spare, we did it. We are right on time. And we appreciate the commissioner's time, the members of the public who contributed public testimony, and the proponent team for their time this evening.
Thank you all.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Have a good
Good night.
night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.